a special Unfilter news bulletin just for our supporters, our patrons, at patreon.com/unfilter. A limited edition of the show this week, just for those of you who support us. Welcome to Unfilter, the supporters edition this week. Mr. Chase and I are out. The beard is traveling. The show has no editor. And I'm using that as an excuse to get a haircut and to sort the back end out for the show, which we have to do from time to time. But I didn't want to leave you guys hanging, so I thought we'd do like a special focus on just a couple of stories this week that you probably saw go by in the headlines and went, geez, I can't wait till Unfilter talks about that. Well, guess what? That's what we're doing right here. Now, I could have gone anywhere with these stories, but I decided to focus in on essentially we're going to say three stories. Our first story goes back a little bit. You remember that dossier that was put together originally by a Republican operative, then a Democrat operative. He was a former MI6 agent, so he had some quote-unquote credibility in this area. You remember this story? And they had the whole Trump hired hookers to pee on the bed that Obama slept in, and that the Russians had real blackmail on Trump that could potentially be used to control him once he's in office. CNN was one of two networks that ran this story. CNN and BuzzFeed. BuzzFeed went all in on the details, even published parts of the dossier, which we've linked to in past show notes. CNN went much more conservative because they, I believe, had a source in the intelligence agency feeding them information. So when they were questioned about it, they essentially doubled down on their stance all along because they were being told by a source in the agency. Well, that source has come along and given them new information that CNN is more than happy to relay.
We have some breaking news now. CNN has learned new information about that ongoing investigation into those allegations raised in a collection of memos created by a former British intelligence agent at the time he made the memos for political opponents of then candidate Donald Trump. Jim Sciutto and Evan Perez have been working the story. And Jim, let's start with you. What precisely have investigators learned?
Look how happy, excited Jim is. Jim is so excited because Jim's got a buddy, and that buddy in the intelligence agency texts him, and he gets to take those texts and make a big story out of it, and this makes him super valuable to CNN.
Well, Jake, for the first time, U.S. investigators say that they have corroborated some of the communications detailed in a 35-page dossier compiled by a former British intelligence agent.
Yeah, we just said
CNN
that.
was first to report last month that then President-elect Donald Trump and President Barack Obama were briefed on the existence of the memos prior to the inauguration. Until now, U.S. officials have said that none of the content or allegations have been verified. But now, multiple current and former U.S. law enforcement and intelligence officials tell CNN that intelligence intercepts of foreign nationals confirmed that some of the conversations described in the dossier took place between the same individuals on the same days and from the same locations as detailed in the dossier.
Let's stop right there. So what we just heard was intelligence intercepts, which most likely means NSA, but we don't know, have confirmed with, it sounds like multiple other intelligence agents. Let's break down what he said because it's kind of important here. Go ahead, tell us again.
Intercepts of foreign nationals, content or allegations have been verified,
okay,
but now...
So it's the content or allegations haven't been verified, but what we do have is timing.
Multiple current and former U.S. law enforcement and intelligence officials tell CNN that intelligence intercepts of foreign nationals...
Intelligence intercepts of foreign nationals, so that would mean the Russians,
confirmed that some of the conversations described in the dossier took place between the same individuals on the same days and from the same locations as detailed in the dossier.
So what does that mean exactly?
Should be clear that CNN has not confirmed the content of the calls or whether any of the content relates to then candidate Trump.
Right. So they've been informed by an intelligence source who says, yeah, we've got this data. This is another manifestation of the intelligence agency's war on Trump. They're going after him for everything. Because let's remember, what this really breaks down to is, at worst, I would suspect, Flynn called up and said, don't worry about these sanction things. We're going to work with you on ISIS. We're going to start rolling some of this stuff back. Just give us a little time once we get in office and things get settled. Now, I would assume that's what he said, because that's essentially what we've overheard open mic recordings of Obama in the past during election season. This is a common thing. Diplomats, this is not an unusual practice. So why it's making such a big stink? Because they've got him. They've got the technology. This is what the spying apparatus is really about. This is what it's really about, folks, because they don't care about spying on you and I. They don't care. At worst, our little details are not that interesting to them. But what they do care about is businesses and government officials, and when they want to get somebody, they can get them, just like we saw happen to previous what was his name, who slept with his author. You guys know what I'm talking about. He might be replacing Flynn, but I'm blanking on him right now. But that's another example of they caught him in his Gmail account. They can catch these guys now because they're watching everything. You know, they're watching the politicians. This truly, to me, seems like what it's likely about. Is not so much the common person, and sure, a little terrorism thrown in there, but the real threat from terrorism isn't that extreme. They're much more concerned about government corruption or controlling the government. They are the shadow government that doesn't get reelected. And so now they're going after Trump in any way they can. And my understanding was that Flynn was a pretty well-respected man within the military-industrial complex. However, there really seems to be a push for more war in Syria, more war with Russia, or at least provoking war with Russia, getting right up to the line. And the easy answer would be, well, sure, that's how the entire complex makes money. That's how they get more jobs. But that seems short-sighted. If they're so clever, if they're so manipulative, that doesn't seem like they would also be short-sighted. So I don't understand what that missing piece is. But to me, this seems to be a clear manifestation of the intelligence agencies reaching out directly to the press, giving them very specific information that doesn't go too far, but lets them run with a story that they can be confident on, that damages Trump and causes ripple effects that we're about to see. This tying Trump to the Russians, implying that there might be blackmail, is fundamental to their case against Trump.
As detailed in the dossier, we should be clear that CNN has not confirmed the content of the calls or whether any of the content relates to then candidate Trump.
Now, why haven't they confirmed that content? Because they haven't been given it. They've only been told. And we're also witnessing an era where the mainstream media takes one or two single, maybe three sources at best. I so doubt it, though. They take the face value word of the intelligence agencies, which is ironic because they're not known for being honest in any capacity. They take the word of the intelligence agencies and they run with it as if it is true fact. And that has led us astray, so many times with so many things in the past. Everybody likes to cite Iraq and weapons of mass destruction, but it goes way back beyond that. So there's so much case to doubt what the intelligence agencies say, and they don't do it. My suspicion is, my theory here is simply, either they're working for the intelligence agencies, they're part of the intelligence agencies, they're so desperate for the access, they run with the story, or they also are simply looking for patterns that match a belief that they already have in place, and when they find confirmation data, they go with it, and it's happening at a level they don't even realize. Anyways, I mention any of this because this one story, and the story that not just this report, but this entire story, really shows the intelligence agencies meddling and the media's complicity with the entire thing. It's if you're watching this story closely enough, it's all laid out there in front of you. It's all for you to see because they're telling you their sources are the intelligence agency. They're being told the contents, but they don't get to see the contents themselves. They're getting told and they're running stories specifically to damage Donald Trump. There's got to be an agenda behind that.
And none of the newly learned information relates, I should say, to the salacious allegations in the dossier. The corroboration, based on intercepted communications, has given U.S. intelligence and law enforcement, quote, greater confidence in the credibility of some aspects of the dossier as they continue to actively investigate its contents, these sources say. Reached for comment this afternoon, White House spokesman Sean Spicer said, quote, we continue to be disgusted by CNN's fake news reporting. Spokesman.
Okay, so here's why I feel like that's too far, but here's where I draw a comparison that really bothers me about this situation. I really feel like they're going all in on this dossier. This is a month-long story now, which is unusual for CNN in the first place. Second of all, what's also unusual about this is the lack of detail they have when compared to what you might also consider an equally large story, like all of the emails that were distributed via WikiLeaks. The emails and their entire content and the discussion chains are there. The names of the participants are attached to each email. The content is there. All you have to do is a little digging, and there's so much more story there. There is 15 years worth of stories in WikiLeaks right now. 15 years worth of stories minimum in WikiLeaks right now. The content, the original sourcing, it's all there. They could be the originator of the story. It would be huge for them. But instead, they report on a dossier that was originally created by their own admission by somebody creating an attack list who got paid by the size of the dossier. By their own admission, it's been floating around D.C. for months and nobody took it seriously. And by their own admission, large parts of it are likely false. But the veracity in which they report this story, you will not find anything comparable to it on the WikiLeaks reporting, on the DNC email leaks. None of it. Even if they sniff this hard around Trump's taxes, they would get more traction. If they went after the Clinton Foundation, they could get more traction. But instead, they're being piecemealed information by some intelligence agencies to manipulate their reporting to attack Donald Trump. This would be an interesting story if they went after all of this stuff. I mean, imagine the kind of reporting we could get. So when you compare it to what they could be reporting from WikiLeaks and how they go after this really poorly sourced information where they can't actually cite a single official, they can't put down a single name to go on the record. But with WikiLeaks, all the names are already there. It's incredible if you think about it in that context. There's obviously an agenda here.
To be disgusted by CNN's fake news reporting. Spokesman for the FBI, the Department of Justice, the CIA, and the Office of the Director of National Intelligence had no comment.
Fake news is what they call any news they don't like.
And we really are getting so pissed by it. We are really hating that. We just do not like it. We do not like it.
Fake news is what they call any news they don't like. Let me go to you, Evan. What is it precisely that investigators have corroborated here?
Well, Jake, the dossier contains 35 pages of claims and allegations. And when U.S. investigators first started looking into it, they were trying to see whether there was any truth to the allegation that Russians were seeking to compromise President Trump.
Why would they even tell you that much? If this was truly a matter of national security at the very executive level of our government, the last people you would tell is CNN. It's astonishing.
Now, to start, the investigators looked for information they could verify easily to give them a sense of the credibility of the author, who was already known, someone they were familiar with as having credible sources.
He's just telling us stuff we already know.
The dossier details about a dozen conversations between senior Russian officials and other Russian individuals, so that was one of the starting points.
So they're not conversations between Trump and Russians. They're not conversations between Russians and Trump's staff.
One thing that the U.S. has is a collection of foreign call intercepts so that they have information to seek to verify some of the alleged conversations described in the dossier.
So if we go by the dossier, it's essentially vague implications in the phone calls, vague implications here in the dossier, vague implications that these Russian officials, former Russian government officials and current Russian government officials, were chatting up about how they have blackmail on Trump.
Now, sources would not confirm which specific conversations were intercepted or the content of those discussions due to the classified nature of U.S. intelligence collection programs.
So their sources just tell them that they've listened to two different Russian officials talking about Trump, but they won't say what they said. It's incredible.
U.S. intelligence officials emphasize that the conversations they have now verified were solely between foreign nationals, including those in or tied to the Russian government, intercepted during routine intelligence gathering.
In Russia.
But some of those individuals involved in the intercepted communications were known to the U.S. intelligence community as, quote, heavily involved in collecting information damaging to Hillary Clinton and helpful to Donald Trump. Sources would not confirm which specific conversations were intercepted.
What's funny about that is that's what this whole dossier is based on, is a source who was collecting damaging information on Donald Trump. It's a shocking thing that they were doing. It's shocking. But the entire story started because of this dossier this other guy made.
Or the content of those discussions due to the classified nature of those programs.
So they know nothing. They know nothing, but they're reporting on it. And that was sort of the start of a news snowball that eventually led to more Russian ties with Trump and his administration.
The president's advisor on national security may not have much job security. Late today, White House counselor Kellyanne Conway said the president had full confidence in Michael Flynn, but minutes later, the White House rushed out a correction, saying that Mr. Trump is evaluating Flynn.
Now, would that have happened in the Obama administration? If Josh Earnest had said something and then later the White House had released a correction, something tells me CBS News might have just ran with the correction in the evening news. Who knows, right? And I actually think it's good to tell the public that, so I don't discourage it. I just pointed it out, again, as another observation. I'll get off this soapbox eventually, but this is sort of the analysis mode we're still in right now, and I think it's important to continue to draw a comparison for a little while.
This is all about conversations that Flynn had with Russia's ambassador to the United States before the president was inaugurated.
Like I was talking about those sanction rollbacks and the ISIS stuff. Hey, we're just gonna talk about this, and this is part of the information they now have against Trump officials. This is part of the entire intelligence agency's approach. Is they go after Trump with the dossier, they go after his officials with this stuff, and at worst, this guy at worst was just negotiating some shit around the sanctions that Obama put that are kind of chicken shit in the first place, right? At worst. In any action that someone takes to de-escalate us from a war with Russia seems like actions that are for the United States' best interest long term. So if it's a dossier where Russian officials are talking about Trump and hookers pissing on beds, or it's the intelligence agencies capturing the phone calls between Flynn and the Russian official, which of course they would have done, they're using that information selectively with the press to attack.
It can be a crime for a private citizen to negotiate with a foreign government. Here's our chief White House correspondent, Major Garrett.
North Korea is a big problem, and we will deal with that very strongly.
As President Trump and Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau held a news conference, National Security Advisor Michael Flynn, his job hanging in the balance, joined other senior White House officials in the front row. Mr. Trump ignored shouted questions about his confidence in Flynn as he left the East Room. Counselor to the president, Kellyanne Conway.
Yes, General Flynn does enjoy the full confidence of the president, and this is a big week for General Flynn. He's the point of contact for many of these foreign visits.
Just over an hour later, though, the White House said the president is evaluating the situation. The FBI and other intelligence agencies are investigating conversations Flynn had with the Russian ambassador to the U.S. before President Trump's inauguration. Flynn initially denied discussing U.S. sanctions on Russia during the calls.
You notice how they always go with the FBI. The FBI is always the intelligence, quote-unquote, agency, which creeps me out to call the FBI an intelligence agency. They're the agency that's willing to go out on public and say, yeah, we're looking into this. But the NSA, the ones where you know they're actually getting the contents of the emails and the calls and the text messages, they always just get cited as other agency. Sneaky little bastards. We're on to you.
Agencies are investigating conversations Flynn had with the Russian ambassador to the U.S. before President Trump's inauguration. Flynn initially denied discussing U.S. sanctions on Russia during the calls, a potential violation of federal law. But last week, Flynn said he couldn't be sure if the topic came up. In January, Vice President-elect Pence defended Flynn on Face the Nation.
Those conversations that happened to occur around the time that the United States took action to expel diplomats had nothing whatsoever to do with those sanctions.
The White House now says President Trump is speaking to Vice President Pence relative to the conversation the Vice President had with General Flynn. Multiple sources tell CBS Flynn called Pence to apologize this weekend. White House policy advisor Stephen Miller was asked yesterday if deceiving the Vice President was a fireable offense.
It's not for me to answer hypotheticals. It wouldn't be responsible. It's a sensitive matter.
Flynn's attempt to apologize has not satisfied Pence or White House Chief of Staff Reince Priebus, and his status remains tenuous. Scott, today the president, reading from a list provided by White House press aides, called on two members of the U.S. press corps. Neither asked about Flynn.
Major Garrett at the White House for us tonight.
So this is a big shitstorm now. This is turning into something that, of course, every news network is running with. It was across all of the networks. Here's a CNN example.
In a White House where staff turmoil is becoming the norm, today it's Michael Flynn's turn in the hot seat. Unease is spreading among Trump allies and White House aides over whether President Trump's national security advisor misled administration officials, including the vice president, when he insisted he didn't discuss sanctions with the Russian ambassador.
I think now he's saying that he doesn't remember whether he did or not. So that's a conversation he's going to need to have with the president and the vice president.
Yeah, they went to Chris Christie for some reason.
To clear that up.
A U.S. official tells CNN that Flynn did discuss sanctions with the Russian ambassador.
How could a U.S. official know that? How could a U.S. official know that? And how could a U.S. official tell CNN that? How can that be possible?
Saying that he doesn't remember whether he did or not. So that's a conversation he's going to need to have with the president and the vice president to clear that up.
Listen to her words. Listen to her words.
A U.S. official tells CNN that Flynn did discuss sanctions with the Russian ambassador before Trump assumed office. That contradicts past statements from White House officials. And now Flynn is unable to deny that he discussed those sanctions.
He's unable to deny because the NSA has come out and said, we've got your phone call.
Flynn endeared himself to Trump with his staunch support on the campaign trail.
You know what the people want? The people want change.
But a source says the president privately expressed frustration with Flynn over the weekend.
You really screwed
Flynn
up.
isn't the only aide catching flack. On Sunday, one of Trump's friends, the CEO of Newsmax, told CNN that Chief of Staff Reince Priebus isn't up to the job.
I think there's a lot of weakness coming out of the Chief of Staff. I think Reince Priebus, good guy, well-intentioned, but he clearly doesn't know how the federal agencies work.
Now, Ruddy is watering down his critique, saying the president doesn't necessarily share his concern.
I am not speaking for him. I'm speaking for Chris Ruddy, as I always have and will continue to do so.
Meanwhile, multiple sources close to Trump insist Priebus's job is secure. One person the president is clearly pleased with, his top policy advisor, Stephen Miller. Trump heaped praise on him Sunday, tweeting, "Congratulations, Stephen Miller, on representing me this morning on the various Sunday morning shows. Great job."
Oh, good praise.
With Trump's travel ban blocked by the courts,
what a good boy.
Miller
What a good
took
boy.
aim at the judicial system and touted the powers of the presidency, seeming to question the constitutional system of checks and balances.
Our opponents, the media, and the whole world will soon see, as we begin to take further actions, that the powers of the president to protect our country are very substantial and will not be questioned.
But he also served up some glaring falsehoods, insisting the only reason Trump lost New Hampshire was because people were bussed in to vote illegally.
You know, I love that they don't even question that as a possibility. Because the Project Veritas tapes seem to imply this very much was a possibility. We played the clips on this show where the guy talked about it. So why is it so ridiculous to just entertain the idea? They start from a premise that it's 100% false. I mean, she even said falsehoods.
I can tell you that this issue of busing voters into New Hampshire is widely known by anyone who's worked in New Hampshire politics. It's very real. It's very serious.
There's no evidence of widespread voter fraud in New Hampshire.
Have you looked into it at all? There's no evidence. That's because nobody's tweeted it at you? What's your standard?
And Miller didn't provide any to support his claims.
That's your You don't provide any evidence for your claims, and then it's just unbelievable. CNN reporting. All right. So, anyways, that was an attack across the board on Trump admins. Obviously, from getting information from top U.S. officials and sources, which led to this next story.
Breaking news overnight. The president's national security advisor, Michael Flynn, forced to resign 3 weeks after the White House was told by the Justice Department that he could be vulnerable to Russian blackmail for not telling the truth about his contacts with the Russian ambassador.
Now, is that why he resigned, or did he resign because he got caught lying and it makes the Trump administration look wimpy if you let somebody like him lie to the vice president and they like to be tough guys? So that's one reason to get him out. A second reason is they already got enough problems with all this Russian bullshit. They don't need this guy dragging them down, somebody in this position. He's got to go. They don't got time for the controversy. They want to move on. They got shit they want to get done. And they want Pence to look like a tough guy, a tough, serious guy. And Trump's a tough guy. He fires people. That's, to me, likely why he left. Not because a month ago they said they might have blackmail him. But that's ABC's reporting.
Breaking news overnight. The president's national security advisor, Michael Flynn, forced to resign 3 weeks after the White House was told by the Justice Department that he could be vulnerable to Russian blackmail for not telling the truth about his contacts with the Russian ambassador. ABC's chief White House correspondent John Karl has all the latest. And John, this is extraordinary. The White House was warned that the president's national security advisor could be a national security threat.
So the idea would be that the Russians would hold over his head and use it to manipulate him, the fact that they did discuss it. And then they could use that down the road. The idea here would be that they'd go against that's going against their own interest, because that phone call was very much in their interest. And having a continued dialogue like that is fundamentally important to their continued survival and interest. So it would seem very unlikely and very illogical, but, crazy Fox Putin, maybe he would then later on, a year down the road at just the right moment, use it as a trump card to get Flynn to do what he wants. This big, scandalous thing that nobody would give a shit about in 2 years from now or a year. It literally as the story ages, it matters less and less, because Michael Flynn would otherwise be talking to this diplomat on nearly a daily basis anyways once he's in his job. So as time goes on, this story becomes less and less relevant. So the blackmail becomes less and less powerful, which fundamentally undermines the argument that that's why he had to go. But we continue to go with it. We got to go with it.
Warned that the president's national security advisor could be a national security threat.
Unbelievable, George.
Unbelievable.
And Flynn really had no choice but to resign. He had misled the White House, and the president had clearly lost confidence in him.
General Flynn was front and center as President Trump met with the Canadian Prime Minister, but he had already fallen out of favor. The president refusing to even answer whether he had confidence in him.
Do you have confidence in Michael Flynn, Mr. President?
In his letter of resignation, Flynn made it clear he was leaving because he had misled Vice President Pence and other senior officials about his conversations with the Russian ambassador.
That would seem to be why he's leaving.
I inadvertently briefed the Vice President-elect and others with incomplete information regarding my phone calls with the Russian ambassador. Vice President Pence took that inaccurate information and repeated it on national television.
What I can confirm, having spoken to him about it, is that those conversations that happened to occur around the time that the United States took action to expel diplomats had nothing whatsoever to do with those sanctions.
But that was not true. The Justice Department became aware of Flynn's lie through routine surveillance of the Russian ambassador and notified the White House weeks ago. But it wasn't until Friday that Flynn personally apologized to the vice president. The shakeup comes at a critical time for President Trump. A missile test over the weekend by North Korea, rising tensions with Iran, and a key visit Wednesday by Israeli Prime Minister Bibi Netanyahu to the White House. For the moment, retired Lieutenant General Keith Kellogg, who had been Flynn's chief of staff, will serve as acting national security advisor. Also under consideration as a permanent replacement, retired General David Petraeus and retired Navy SEAL Vice Admiral Robert Harward.
The search for a replacement, a permanent replacement for Flynn, begins right now. I am told that General Petraeus will be here at the White House today. But the front...
That's who it was, David Petraeus. That's what I was trying to remember earlier.
Runner here seems to be Vice Admiral Bob Harward. He is somebody who happens to also have a very close relationship with General Mattis over at the Pentagon.
So this is an interesting development because I think by all accounts, Flynn was considered pretty qualified for the job. Let's end with just a couple of random out there stories. This one's been pretty soundly denied by Edward Snowden, but doesn't mean, and it was, I believe, denied before this story ran, but...
Tonight, NBC News has learned that the Russian government is considering offering fugitive Edward Snowden as a gift to President Trump.
I love it! I love it! I love it! I love it so much. So much. Because where could they possibly be getting this information from, guys? Where could they be getting this information from? How could they be learning about this? I'll let you ponder that.
This, according to a senior official who has analyzed a series of highly sensitive intelligence reports.
Now, a senior official who's analyzed a series... Okay, now if you already know, don't spoil it.
Intelligence reports detailing Russian conversations and deliberations. A second source in the intelligence community confirms the intelligence and notes it has been received since the inauguration. An official who has analyzed a series of highly sensitive intelligence reports.
Highly sensitive, not classified. Interesting. The reason why is because that first person is Mike Morrell. Your good buddy Mike Morrell, who worked at the CIA as a career man. He ran it a couple of times when top guys were in and out. Number 2 most of the time. Then he quits and joins CBS. It's a huge jump, right? Then he quit CBS because he wanted to publicly endorse, in a really big way, Hillary Clinton. And now, he's no longer a CBS regular contributor. He comes on from time to time, though. He's still got a good relationship. But he went all in for Hillary. Because he represents now a public arm of the CIA. He's still an agency guy. So he looks at these documents, and he gives it to CBS, he gives it to NBC, and then NBC was able to get another official to verify it. So double sourcing. You got Morrell and somebody still in the agency. What do you suppose the chances are the person that verified in the agency was the person that gave the documents to Morrell in the first place? I'd say the chances are probably pretty high.
Who has analyzed a series of highly sensitive...
Let's go back a bit.
Tonight, NBC News has learned that the Russian government is considering offering fugitive Edward Snowden as a gift to President Trump. This, according to a senior official who has analyzed a series of highly sensitive intelligence reports.
A senior official. I don't think Mike Morrell can be considered a senior official anymore.
Detailing Russian conversations and deliberations. A second source in the intelligence community confirms the intelligence and notes it has been received since the inauguration. The sources say Russia has been formulating various ploys to curry favor with the new president.
Now, this Morrell has been a real Russian fearmonger the entire time. This is a doubling down, isn't it?
During the campaign, Mr. Trump made it clear what he wanted to see happen.
What do you suppose the chances are that once a large case is assembled against Trump at some point in the future, that these news stories will be cited as evidence? A lot of time I've seen in these hearings, they actually cite news reporting as evidence for their case. It's fascinating because the intelligence agencies supply the news agency with selective information, they report on it, and then later, once there's a hearing, the hearing will use the news report as source as proof. It happens all the time.
I think he's a total traitor, and I would deal with him harshly. And if I were president, Putin would give him over.
Snowden has been charged under the Espionage Act and faces at least 30 years in prison. The intel sources tell NBC News the Snowden gift would be part of an ongoing Russian campaign to disrupt the American system.
This seems so unlikely to me, doesn't it?
As they did during the election.
One of the things that Putin or the Russians may see is that they could appear to be offering a gift as a part of a warming of relations.
Yeah, for you audio listeners, yes, this is the B-roll of Putin walking through the large gold doors that I believe has now played 172 times on the Unfilter show.
But at the end of the day, it creates complication for the new administration.
Complications that might arise during a Snowden trial, like reopening the debate about American surveillance and civil liberties. Good for the Russians. Last year, Mike Pompeo, now CIA director, said prison was not enough for Snowden.
And I think the proper outcome would be that he would be given a death sentence.
We asked Mr. Snowden's ACLU lawyer about his possible return. Team Snowden has received no such signals and has no new reason for concern.
Okay.
In December, Mr. Snowden himself said he wasn't worried.
Is there going to be some kind of deal where Trump says, hey, look, give this guy to me as some kind of present? Am I worried about it? Not really. I know I did the right thing.
I think this is one of those rare cases where the stakes are so high, the diplomatic implications so deep, that anything can happen. I think at the end of the day, Moscow holds the cards here.
The Justice Department told NBC News the U.S. would welcome Snowden's return. The Kremlin told us the talk of returning Snowden to the U.S. was nonsense, and the White House had no comment.
This is not a story. It's not a story, but your buddy Mike Morrell hooked you up with the 411, so you're running with it, aren't you? Yeah. All right. And then one more attack on Trump this week. This is just kind of a theme, I guess. And this is something that I've noticed myself.
Not since this hot mess of a three-way has a handshake gotten so much attention, clocked at almost 19 seconds. This became the handshake that left the Japanese Prime Minister shaken.
So they're making fun of Trump's handshake these days, and of course it gets all the nighttime news. He does do an awkward handshake. I will give you that. If you watch, he really kind of pulls people in a little bit. It's kind of a weird thing.
It's called the handshake barbaric.
I'm also very much of a germaphobe.
Donald Trump has been risking germs galore with his over-the-top handshakes, many of which include a yank, be it his Supreme Court nominee or his VP. Call it what you will. The pull in, the tug, the yank and pull, the grab and jerk. When he did it to a winner of The Apprentice, it seemed like a tug of war.
Donald Trump can't shake hands right.
There you go. That's what they're doing. That's what they're doing. Thought I'd leave you with a little bit, maybe make you smile. All right, thank you for supporting the show. We'll be back next week with a full show, a full spectrum attack. After we get some of our S sorted, hopefully I get myself my hair cut and the beard's back to edit. We'll be primed and we'll have a lot to talk about. Thanks for joining me.